so that we can share it also with you at a later date, as well as with other trainees. So welcome to this session on tips for success. This is on CIHR and FRQS training awards. And I want to encourage you throughout today's session, you can use the Zoom chat function for any questions that you have, and we're happy to answer those questions. Obviously, you can also contact us afterwards for questions. We will share a copy of the slides with all of our participants today, so you can also review the slides on your own time. So to give you a sense of who we are here on this call, I'd really like to know a little bit about each of you, and I have a poll that should help us to get to know that. But just to introduce myself and Christina Ferrant, who's also on the call. So my name is Emily Bell, and I manage the Desjardins Center for Advanced Training at the Research Institute of the MUHC. And Christina on the call is also our DCAT coordinator. And so as a team, we are here really to support your professional and career development while you're in graduate studies or in the postdoctoral fellowship. So today's session is really focused around trying to communicate with you some of the best practices around applying for scholarships and fellowships with our two major, essentially, funding bodies. So the goals are really, first, give you some information about what are the competitions and how they're evaluated, to obviously solicit any general questions you might have, and also to share some helpful resources or places you might go next with, if you are applying this year, what you might do next after this session. And I don't know, if there are other goals that you might have, I encourage you to write those into the group chat, and we'll also try to then come across all of the goals that you might have as well if they're not in this list already. So to share with you just a little bit about my experience and sort of coming towards this issue of applying for scholarships and fellowships. I was previously a graduate student. I did master's, PhD, and postdoctoral work. So I definitely have applied for my share of fellowship and scholarship applications, definitely with CIHR, with FRQS, and also with SHRC, which is the social sciences funding body in Canada. I also have worked and applied to internal scholarships, so some that aren't those big scholarships. And also to give you some idea, I did a master's and I did a PhD. I was never funded by a federal or a provincial scholarship until at my postdoctoral level, where I was funded by all of them. So never, never give up and never stop seeking different opportunities for funding. I've also reviewed the doctoral competition with CIHR 1 year, so I have a sense of what those applications look like and how it is on the other side to be a reviewer of doctoral scholarship applications, as well as also evaluated and applied for funding at the supervisor, essentially, level, or at the principal investigator level. So I have a good sense of what's happening in terms of the different funding agencies and these competitions. I've been on kind of both sides of it, so I'm hoping to share my experience with you on that front. So I wanted to run a quick poll. If you can answer the following two questions, looking to see how many master's or PhD students we have here, as well as whether this is your first time or not your first time applying for awards. Great, give another couple of seconds as we get up there. Perfect, and I'll share that with you. All right, so I'm sharing those results. You should be able to see them, and you can stop sharing them for yourself when you're done having a look. But just to see here what we have in the audience. So we have mainly master's students, but also some postdocs and PhDs, great. And for most of you, it's your first time applying to these competitions. So wonderful, that helps me a lot to know sort of where you're at in terms of these applications. Okay, so the first thing I guess to cover is what are these major funding bodies? So the federal funding body that we'll be talking most about is the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, CIHR. That is our Canadian federal funding agency who funds health research that's conducted in Canada. So they have competitions for principal investigators, but also for students as well as for postdocs within. The other body that we're going to talk about, the other acronym we're going to use a lot is FRQS, and that stands for the Fonds de Recherche du Québec Santé. This is the provincial Quebec funding agency for health research. And they also have competitions for PIs, for students, and fellows. So together, these two, the federal and the provincial funding agencies, are really there to fund the interesting and exciting research that's conducted by students and award these scholarships and fellowships to the most competitive students. So in terms of timelines, important off the front. So we have the Doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship, which is how I'll refer to it going forward. This is an award which is basically the CIHR Doctoral Competition Award, okay? You'll see it referred to with different names in different places. I know that is a bit confusing. But from now on, I'll refer to it as the Doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship. And so it goes alongside the Masters Canada Graduate Scholarship, which is also the CIHR equivalent Masters Award. For these two awards, the Doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship and the Masters, the deadlines for application are set by McGill and your graduate program. So it's very important that for these two competitions, that you're looking towards your emails that come from your graduate program, and that if you have no idea and you haven't seen any emails, that you might reach out to your graduate programs to get a sense of what their deadlines are for application. Because the application for these programs takes place first to McGill, and then McGill does an evaluation of all the applications, and then they forward on to be competitive against the other federal applicants, the awards for McGill. So that's the information I can give you for those. The Masters Canada Graduate Scholarship, usually you'd be working on those applications through the fall, and your deadlines for your graduate programs in McGill will be November, December, and for the doctoral program earlier than that. So really very soon. So, be contacting your graduate program about that, because we're looking at more kind of October, November, at least last year for that competition. Then what's left basically are the postdoctoral competition for CIHR. And the deadline for that this year is December 1st. Okay, so you have some time to work on that fellowship application. And then for the FRQS awards, they're very, very kind, and they put everything all on the same day. So if you're applying to a provincial training award for master's, doctoral, or postdoctoral training, the same deadline, October 15th, is going to apply to everyone. So that's probably maybe where a lot of you have your eyes set right now, because once that application is prepared, then it might also be used for things like the Masters Canada Graduate Scholarship Award down the road. So knowing what competitions you're eligible to apply to is important. And a lot of the questions revolve around whether you need to be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident to apply, or you can be an international student and apply to these awards. So for any of the fellowship awards, so for postdoctoral fellowships awarded by the CIHR or FRQS, Canadian citizens and permanent residents, as well as international students, are eligible to apply. For the doctoral and the master's Canada Graduate Scholarships, only Canadian and permanent residents are eligible to apply to those programs. And for the FRQS awards, the doctoral and master's awards, they will accept applications from international students. And there's only one sort of caveat to that, and I will go over that eligibility for FRQS award applications. If you have any sort of doubt, you can always go and see at the specific level more information on the graduate and postdoctoral studies website at McGill. So knowing, first of all, what you can apply to is important. And if you can apply to more, if you didn't think maybe that FRQS was open to you, then now it is, then it's a good idea to think about applying to it. So of course, not on the list and things that we won't talk about today are some of the other many scholarships and fellowship awards that are out there to apply to. And those include internal Faculty of Medicine awards, also special competitions at McGill. There are special awards through Healthy Brains for Healthy Lives if you're a student, for instance, in neurosciences. The Research Institute, the MUHC Scholarship and Fellowship Program, which typically, information will be released in the fall or in the winter about those scholarship and fellowship applications. And then lots of federal awards, maybe through foundations or nonprofit organizations. And if there are others that you know about that, that your colleagues might benefit from too, I welcome you to throw those in the chat box. Maybe someone didn't know that an award exists and they'll go look into it now. So I mentioned that for the FRQS program, that international students as well as permanent residents and Canadian citizens were eligible to apply. One of the requirements that applies to all applicants, even Canadian residents, Canadian citizens or permanent residents from outside of Quebec, is the Quebec Residency Requirement. So for whatever competition you might be applying to within the FRQS, you have to provide proof when you submit your award application that you either have a RI-MUHC card, so a healthcare card, or that you can prove that you've been enrolled at a Quebec university for 2 of the last 3 semesters. That's for master's or PhD award applicants. And if you're a postdoctoral applicant, you have to prove that you've been living in Quebec for 6 of the last 7 months. If you meet those criteria, so you can either provide RI-MUHC or you can show that you have essentially had residence by these criteria in living in Quebec for a period of time, then you're eligible to apply. Whether you are an Alberta you come from Alberta or you come from an international context. If you still have questions about eligibility, I encourage you to contact those administrators who are responsible for the programs at the specific funding agencies. So we're talking about at CIHR and at FRQS. And this information is readily available on those web pages, and those individuals are really there to help support you if you're having questions about how to complete your award applications, or if you have questions about whether you are eligible or not. But I do recommend contact them earlier rather than later, right? Because they'll get lots more requests for information as the time goes and the deadline for the applications approaches. So I encourage you then, when you read the information about each of the awards on eligibility, some of the other things that you may have to take into account are how long you've been in your program. So are you at the right period of time to be applying for that competition? What competitions you apply to if you have a professional degree. So they will give you advice on whether you apply, for instance, to the doctoral competition for FRQS or the doctoral competition for holders of professional degrees. So be aware that there might be a different stream for you to apply to. And of course, where you intend to hold your scholarship or fellowship, as long as you're holding it, and I assume most of you are, that we're having this conversation today, you're holding it in Quebec. So that's usually less of a concern, as in, unless you were hoping to take it elsewhere. Perfect. So again, I encourage you, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat box, but otherwise I'll keep barreling through because there's a lot of information about applying to these awards, and I want to make sure we get to all of it. So the next tip really we have is, yes, start your application early, read the instructions very thoroughly before you jump into starting to complete different sections, okay? So don't just go to the online forms, but read the application instructions that are available on the website in detail so that you know exactly what's being asked of you. That's especially important because some elements do need to be completed ahead of the deadlines. So there may be institutional deadlines, and we talked about that with McGill's graduate, Canada Graduate Scholarships. But the other things that you may need to be asking for ahead of time are sponsors assessments or requesting transcripts. And of course, some of these things can be a little bit more time consuming today than they were, 8 months ago. So definitely look early as to what's going to be required and start some of those things that might take some time to come back to you early. And then don't hesitate, of course, to ask questions or to seek additional advice from your supervisors, obviously, who've been through this many, many times with their students, but also from potentially your fellow students or peers in your lab. These programs don't change drastically from year to year to year. So if you've had or people who've been successful in the past, then ask them for some advice about how they were successful, because generally the requirements are the same, okay? So let's launch in and talk a little bit about what are the main components of any application. We can really separate this into about 4 different things. The first is the online application. So in every case, there will be some sort of an online portal or online application that needs to be completed. For the Doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship, or CGS, and postdoctoral CIHR fellowship competitions, that portal will be called ResearchNet. For the Master's Canada Graduate Scholarship competition, the research portal is owned by NSERC. And for FRQS, the online portal is called the eForm. The second component of all these applications will be a common CV. So common CV is essentially like a trademark name for a program, software that exists that will really generate a standardized CV based on the information that you input into it. So both for CIHR and for FRQS, you will need a common CV. We'll talk about each of these in a little more detail. The third thing are written elements. So there are going to be, for each competition, there are going to be certain elements that you have to write, that in advance you should think about writing in Word documents that then you can upload into the electronic forms that will be required for you to upload them into. And the last thing is basically a catch-all category of other. And so as I mentioned, for certain competitions, you'll need to have transcripts that you can attach. You may need to provide a proof of residency. For instance, the Quebec residency, you'd either have to upload your RI-MUHC, or you'll have to upload another form that talks about your residency. You'll have to sometimes prove your eligibility. For instance, that you haven't been in your program too long in order to apply to a certain funding competition. You may need sponsors assessments, as we talked about, or reference assessments. Those are, I want to underline, FRQS does not request any sponsors assessments. So you'll only need sponsors assessments for CIHR, and that means the Master's and Doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship competition, as well as the postdoctoral CIHR competition. So when we talk about online application, I just wanted to give you kind of like a window into what this looks like. This is the online application for the, for instance, the Doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship or the postdoctoral fellowship. This is ResearchNet. And so this is like the kind of online application that you're going to have to use to pull everything together. And you can see that it's going to require you to attach certain documents that you've written, and it's really what you will submit to the funding agency, okay? You'll submit the online application, which will include all of the pieces and the parts. And it'll generally flag elements that are incomplete, right? You won't be able to submit it until everything that you're supposed to do is complete. So in that way, it's a great, roadmark tool of, as you're preparing your application, what do you need? I will suggest that you should request access to these online forms, as soon as possible. okay? Because you may need to, you know, gain access by giving your email and asking for a code in order to get access, and that can take a day or two. So you want to make sure that you have all the accesses that you need, because then you'll also be able to explore a little bit better what it looks like to actually finalize the application, okay? What all those pieces look like, and where you'll attach all the different documents that are being instructed in the instructions. So that was the online application that you'll essentially submit. The second piece is the common CV. And I said that this was a software, and I'll show you what it looks like. It's a web-based software. Again, that you will have to request access to the common CV software. And through that, what you're going to do is you're going to basically take information that you have on your, you know, your own personal CV or curriculum vitae, and you're going to transpose it into specific sections in the web form. And then it's going to be able to generate the kind of standardized CV that reviewers want when they're assessing your application, so that everybody's applications have the same information essentially. So the kinds of sections, or the sections that you're going to have to complete in the common CV, are the following. There's a section on education, which asks you to list what your previous and current education is. There's a section called recognitions. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. There's a section called employment, where you're going to have to list all your past and current employment. A section where you'll have to list your activities, both academic and non-academic. So here you can be listing academic activities, but also, for instance, volunteer work that you've done can be non-academic activities. If you've participated in innovation competitions, that can also be within there. So activities is a broad category that you can use to put in extracurricular activities as well. And so I want to just return on these other two sections that you'll have to complete. One is called recognitions, and one is called research funding history. So unfortunately, nothing in life is easy. So when you're completing these sections, you need to be completing them a bit differently if you're completing them for the CIHR applications or for the FRQS applications. So if you're applying to an FRQS award, your honors and distinctions will go in the recognition section. So that can be things like best poster prize, first class honors awards, that would be probably like, or, you know, other kinds of prizes that you may have won. Those would go in recognitions. If you've previously held scholarships or fellowships, those will go in the research funding history section. This is different than if you are applying for the CIHR scholarship and fellowship. So if you're applying for a Canada Graduate Scholarship or a Masters Canada Graduate Scholarship or the postdoc competition, you'll have to put your scholarships and fellowships as well as your honors and distinctions in the recognition section. They're very explicit about this difference. So, you know, be thoughtful about what competition you're applying to when you complete your CCV. And you can always put all of your honors and distinctions and scholarships and fellowships in the recognition section. And then if you're applying to FRQS, you just don't include the scholarships and fellowships when you generate the final CV. So you have that choice of what is included. And so instead you would include them in the research funding history section. The last part of the common CV that you're going to have to complete is a part on contributions. And that's going to list posters, presentations that you've done, as well as any publications that you might have. And you're going to complement this section. So you'll fill it out in the web form, and that'll give the very basic information about what is the name of the, for instance, who is an author on that publication, what was the name of the publication, where was it published. However, you're going to complement that with written documents. And those written documents are going to describe in more detail those publications and your role in those publications, okay? We'll talk about what those look like, but in the FRQS, this written piece is called detailed contributions. For the doctoral candidate graduate scholarship, it's called your publications attachment. And for the CIHR postdoctoral competition, it's called additional CCV info. If it was up to me and I could name everything the same thing, obviously I would. It's not up to me. So that's just a flag for you. Whatever competition you're applying to, keep your eyes focused for one of these three names. For most of the competitions, your supervisor also has to complete a common CV, but this common CV is a standard document that they will have all of their information already in because they're applying to their own competitions, and the same thing is required of them. So in general, your supervisor already has a common CV, but they are going to need to share with you the information so that you can upload the directions to get to their common CV in your online application. So something, again, to just make sure you're asking your supervisor whether they're prepared to share their common CV with you. So this is a quick look at what the common CV portal looks like. And you can basically, in order to get there, you can search common CV and in Google, and you'll end up with the Canadian Common CV. That's the C of CCV, Canadian Common CV. And so this is a portal that is going to essentially generate your CV that you would submit. And you can see here in the middle of the screen, I've identified for this CV, which is my Canadian Common CV, that the funding source would be CIHR, and the CV type is CIHR academic. So you'll be sort of given the instructions that you need, but you'll always be sort of selecting for what competition you're going to apply to. Because again, it's going to give you check marks, as you can see some check marks here, or red X's if there are sections that you haven't completed that you'll need to complete in order to be sort of finished or finalized in terms of your common CV for that award program. Great. So the written elements. Well, this is one of the, things that's going to maybe take you the most time, okay, is the bulk of writing the pieces that are required for your master, for your training awards, okay? So I want to review them, and I want to review what they're trying to get out of these sections, okay? So the first thing we'll talk about let's talk actually about the FRQS awards first, because it's so homogeneous in terms of what you need to include. So when you're applying for an FRQS award, master's, PhD, or postdoctoral, you're going to have to submit the same things. So you're going to have to write a description of your research project, about 2 pages. You're going to have to write a section called aptitudes and experiences, and that's going to be about 1 page. I say about, but I mean, you really are going to have a certain limit, okay? 2 pages, 1 page. And that includes a description of your participation in research projects and internships in research. So you have 1 page to talk about yourself and your experience in research. You have to write a section that justifies your training environment, and that again is a page. We'll talk about what that could include. And then here's that section that I made reference to, the detailed contribution section. So this section is a complement to your Canadian Common CV. So those publications that you listed in your Canadian Common CV, and your supervisor has the same in their Canadian Common CV, has to be accompanied by a written document for which there is a clear template on the FRQS site that outlines your detailed contributions. So those include sections about the most important contributions that you have, your activities and contributions that might be a bit of a repeat from your activities section on the Common CV, any interruptions in your studies, any patents or intellectual property that you hold, And then this is the part, your publication. So it's going to give you a space to write more information about what your role is in percent for each multi-authored publication, okay? So did you contribute 30%, 40%, 80% to this publication, to the content of this publication, to making this publication happen? Other small pieces that are not really, you know, fully written pieces that you'll have to include are, again, there are templates of exactly what needs to be uploaded in the case of FRQS, but there's one asking you to, again, summarize your publications, count them essentially. Same with scholarships, fellowships, honors, and distinctions. So they want to see the counts that you do on this little table they include match up to what's written in your common CV. Okay, so that's FRQS. So what about for the various CIHR awards that are often going to be a bit different? You know, generally the same things are required, but they're going to be called different, okay, by different names. So for the Master's Canada Graduate Scholarship competition, I know there's lots of master's students here. The two things that you're going to have to prepare written are an outline of your proposed research. Okay, so from 2 pages for the FRQS down to 1 page here. And a bibliography and citations, you can have a page on bibliography and citations. Then for the doctoral competition, I see a couple of questions in the Zoom chat, and I'm gonna come to them right after I finish this slide, okay? So for the Canada Graduate Scholarship doctoral competition, you'll now have, again, 1 page for your research project summary, still down from 2 pages for the FRQS competition. You'll have 2 pages to describe your contribution to the publications that you've listed in your common CV. And you're going to have to write a section called training expectations. Okay, so this is the first time we've seen this in the competitions. And you'll see that it also applies to the postdoc competition. So the postdoc competition is almost identical to the doctoral competition. You need a training expectations section, a research project description. You'll have to define your contribution to publications that you've listed in your common CV in a section called additional CCV information. And the only addition here is that you'll also have, I think, maybe even less than a page to describe your research training environment, okay? But that's something that you may have already written for an FRQS competition, for example, okay. I want to just quickly touch on a couple of things in the Zoom chat. Is the detailed contribution with our current or past supervisor? Detailed contributions, yes, okay. So the detailed contributions section in FRQS, so it should touch on actually everything. So, so your current supervisor is the one that should also submit like their own detailed contributions, okay, with your application. But your information should be like archive. Everything you've done should go on that detailed contributions page, okay? And so if you're just starting your program and you don't have any, say, publications, or posters to put in there, then you may have a relatively, you know, loose document. It won't have many sections that are filled. FRQS still wants you to fill out this in a very specific way. So they're going to have a form and you really literally will want still every section appearing, even if what you write is no content for this section, okay? However, I want to encourage you that, like, even if you have no publications, no patents or IP, which, you know, is very rare that students would have the patents or IP, probably fairly rare that students might have interruptions, although I would assume if you also had interruptions in your studies related to COVID, that you should definitely be putting them there. That you do write something in at least the activities and contributions section. So that can be your role in other research that you've done. It can be extracurriculars or volunteer work that you've done, which sort of show your interest, commitment to maybe your field of study. So you can put various things in the activities and contribution section. So I wouldn't leave everything blank. If you have, if you read the instructions and you're like, I don't have anything to put in here, I would at least put something into the activities and contribution section. Okay. I hope that answers your question. Let me know if it does not, and I can go further, or we can open up your mic too. And also, yeah, I guess another question about what's in the credentials section of the Common CV. So in the credentials section, really that section would be reserved for if you have, say, for instance, a professional degree and it comes with accreditation, credentialing. So if you have, if you're a nutritionist, if you're a physiotherapist, these are the kinds of things that you want to put in the credentials section, okay? Okay, so I wanted to run another poll here. How do I get to the next poll? Poll 2, okay, here we go. So we just talked about these things and I want to see if it, I know that there's so much different language and each of the competitions is different. And as I'm presenting them, what I imagine and I hope you're doing is just kind of, circling in on the one that matters to you, right? Even though I'm trying to cover all of the different awards. But let's see if you remember what we covered. So if you're applying to an FRQS training award, what will you need to write? And you can select multiple options here. I'll just answer a question on the chat while you answer this poll. So the question is, for FRQS, is there a pre-selection by universities? So no, there is not. For FRQS, you will apply directly through the FRQS online portal. There is no pre-selection by universities. And that's the same for the CIHR postdoctoral fellowship program, where you will, again, you'll apply directly to that program through the ResearchNet portal, through the online application. You'll apply directly to CIHR. One of the things to underline when you're applying as a postdoc, for instance, or as a doctoral student to the CIHR competitions, is there'll be a place where you need to select what is the institution that is being paid. Please, at this point, select the institution being paid as McGill University, okay? Because for the doctoral competition, that's how we make sure that you get evaluated within McGill. And for the postdoctoral competition, then that means that McGill will just approve and send your application, okay? Okay, so let's see the results. All right, so yes, so if you're applying to an FRQS training award, you'll need to write a summary of your research project and a justification of your training environment, okay? The training expectations is reserved for competitions within the CIHR. Perfect. I think I have one more. Oh, no, in a minute. I have one more test there. Let me make sure I don't. Oops. Oh, I do, so there, okay, one more. So if you're applying to a CIHR postdoctoral or doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship or a Master's Canada Graduate Scholarship Award, what will you need to provide? Right, so for FRQS, the deadline is October 15th regardless. So there's no pre-deadline, institutional deadline for FRQS. So really, it's that deadline of October 15th at whatever time that your application, you need to submit it to FRQS, exactly. Okay, perfect. One more second, because we still got people responding to this poll. Right. Okay. So if you're applying to a CIHR award, essentially, you'll need to provide, yes, a summary of your research project, yes, your completed Canadian Common CV, and yes, sponsors letters. So great. So all three you'll need to provide if you're applying to any of the CIHR competitions. Okay. So let's just talk briefly. Again, I'm going to share the slides with you, so I'm not going to like read out all of these points. But you know what I wanted to do in terms of the goals of this section was just to, you know, when we see what the written elements are and what they're needed, often we can kind of jump in, which is great. We have ideas about already what we want to write, but we also need to keep in mind, what are reviewers looking to get out of that section? What are they evaluating that section on? Okay, and that's an important place to start when you're writing. Okay, so if we look at some of the written sections here, we can sort of see what is being sort of looked for by reviewers, because this information I've pulled together from the reviewers' grids, how they're actually looking at your application. So the first is about justification of the training environment. So what is this section's goal? So the goal is really like to understand, why is this particular student pursuing training in this particular lab or context? And what's available to them in terms of their space, in terms of their funding, in terms of their equipment, in terms of the special, you know, expertise they might need to do their project. And think, you know, you'll write this section with your supervisor, okay? Because they might have ideas about things that are important for you to include in this section. But what you're looking for is to include and make the best case possible that you're pursuing training somewhere that is going to be very supportive of this, okay? Not only in terms of they may have the funding to help you make sure that you have, you know, the right amount of animals that you're going to do your research with or something like that, but also that they have the expertise in the software, or that, you know, you're going to be using a technology platform and that there's trained staff that can train you on that technology platform. So it's going to cover all of these kinds of things. The next written element I want to quickly touch on is the training expectations, because this, you know, as you saw for doctoral and postdoctoral competitions within CIHR, this is 2 pages. So it's quite a bit of space, and it's very important section. It's really a section about you. It's a section about who you are, what your professional and academic and background is, and those experiences, and also about how you're going to plan for the future. What do you want to get done and accomplish during your time in the doctoral program or in the postdoctoral, in your postdoctoral period? So when you're thinking about this, you shouldn't just think too narrowly about pitching, you know, it's not about it's not about pitching your research project specifically. You have a whole page to summarize your research project and your role in the research project. This section is about you at large. What are you going to spend your time doing? Are there additional professional or career development opportunities you're going to take part in? Are there networks that you're going to, you know, tap into? So, you know, this is really a description of your plans for how your current program is going to prepare you for your goals in the future. And the other thing that should be sort of included here is some description about how you're going to plan, how you're going to use an individual development plan to plan out your goals and your progress. So an individual development plan, and you can look, because CIHR has a version of this, a template that you can use, is essentially a goal planning document of setting up, you know, goals for your future and objectives and activities on how you're going to fulfill those goals. So they want to see that you really have an idea of how you're going to get sort of from point A, which is today I'm in this graduate program and I'm doing this research, to whatever point B is next. And you can see here what reviewers are looking for. They're looking for a clarity of logic, of plans and proposed training, how your training is going to contribute to like making you a more productive, more, sort of engaged academic, and get you closer to being more and more independent, being an expert. So this can be a timely section to write. And then for all of the competitions, you are going to have to write either, something that's a description of your project, and it's going to vary in terms of 1 to 2 pages. But this is your section to describe clearly your research project. And also something that sometimes students forget is your role in the research project. So what are you going to be doing? Don't just assume that the reviewer knows that everything written there is like your work, okay? Make sure to be clear about what your contribution is within here. And that should be in, a general scientific language so it can be understood by general academic scientists. For the FRQS, they're very clear that they want this to follow even some sections, okay? There should be a roadmap. They want to see problem, hypothesis, objectives. So they want to see these individual sections. Don't be afraid of like giving headings to each of these sections to show that you've covered all of these things, because each of them is evaluated. So if you don't say you have a problem there, then it's potentially you won't get those points because the reviewer maybe doesn't perceive that as being a section on the problem if it's written elsewhere. So here reviewers, they're looking for like the right balance, okay? They're looking for a project that is going to be challenging, but important, but is feasible, that it fits with the candidate who's applying, and that it sounds exciting, that the research sounds exciting, that it has, the aims are valuable, that they'll contribute in general to science, to that area, okay? Okay, and the last written section that you'll include for some of these awards, think that I could get the polls to run. Okay, here we go, last poll. Because this is a question that we get a lot. So I'm asking you, who do you ask to complete a sponsor assessment? The sponsor's assessments in this case are going to include basically a rating of the candidate, and they're going to also include a maybe free-form explanation of those ratings. Your supervisors should be well experienced in writing these letters and knowing that these 2 sections really need to be included. The explanations for the ratings are important. Okay, give it 1 more second. We'll end the poll. Okay, we've got a few responses here. We'll end it here. So, who do you ask to complete a sponsor assessment? Yes, the supervisor, your current supervisor, 100%. So that has to be one of your letters for sure. If you've had a past supervisor, so you've done a master's already, a PhD already, yes, that person should also be a reference for a sponsor for your reference assessments. Same with a past internship supervisor, a research internship, research honors project supervisor. Those people make great sponsors as well. If you lack some of those, a professor who knows you well from coursework can be an option for sure. Co-supervisor as well, definitely. Again, somebody who's had some interaction with you, maybe a past co-supervisor is better than a current co-supervisor if you really haven't had much interaction with that person. And I'm really like, nobody suggested lab manager or program manager, which is great because these are not great people to have as your referees. So you really do want someone that the reviewers are going to see as, being placed well to evaluate you also against other students. So those would be typically your academic professors or supervisors. Oops, did I not share that one? Oh, it's so hard. I can never figure out what's going on with these polls. Okay, no, I think I did. Okay, good. So So in terms of sponsors assessments then, what are they looking for? Again, I said that they'd have to complete both a rating as well as a written justification. So what reviewers are looking for is a couple things. They do want to see that like the comments really do support the rating on different scales and different aptitudes of the student, that they're able to really give examples of how that student, meets those aptitudes. They'll also assess, how does that person know the candidate in terms of trying to understand, how well they might know that person's work in terms of what they're giving them as scores. And they're looking ultimately on different aptitudes, your creativity in research, your ability to design experiments, to interpret, and to present results and to communicate results, as well as indications that the candidate is highly energetic and capable of being highly focused, which is important in a graduate program that, you can be focused on to the tasks at hand. So these are the kinds of things you may want to be, especially making sure when you share for instance, your curriculum vitae with sponsors who are going to write you letters, that you may want to also highlight some of these things that you think well describe your successes in these areas, okay? Highlight for them places in your CV that you think you've really excelled. Okay, and then one of the last things I want to sort of cover today is about the evaluation criteria. We're getting close to 4. This, I think, is just important to settle on, especially in terms of understanding how you're going to be evaluated, okay? The evaluation criteria is available on the funder's website for any of the awards, but you have to go looking for it. And I encourage you, go look for it, okay? That's where you're also going to find the information that I previously presented about what reviewers are looking for. Reviewers are going to use those criteria to evaluate your application. So this is where you can double check, have I done all the things that they're looking for in those sections where I can, for instance, write. So I'm not going to go through each of them because I'm going to share the slides with you. And again, you're applying for different awards, but I have a summary slide that I'm going to jump to. So here's the summary slide in terms of the weight of application and how they're evaluated, okay? So for the FRQS awards for the PhD and master's competitions, you can see it's about 25 to 30% that they're evaluating your research project, and about 25 to 35% that they're interested in a strong academic record, okay? In terms of the doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship Competition, they've made it real easy. It's a 50-50 split. So, but general, okay? 50% is about your research ability and potential, and 50% is about your relevant experience and achievements. And then specific parts of those your application, such as your research program, is going to fall into either one or the other of those 50%, okay? All those, your training expectations is going to be taken into consideration in one or the other, your sponsors, assessments, etc. Okay? But they've given it very large evaluation criteria. And the Masters Canada Graduate Scholarship Competition will be based on an evaluation 50% on your academic excellence, so very, very strong in terms of your academic profile, your, for instance, GPA, and 30% is going to be about your research potential, how they evaluate your research potential. For postdoctoral competitions, whether it's CIHR or it's FRQS, 50 to 60% of the evaluation is about your achievements and your research program, okay? So really, it's about having strong sponsor assessments, a very strong training expectation section, a strong research program, and a strong justification of your training environment. Okay, so what about resources next? So what you can do next are a few things. One, if you've already got something written in terms of your application, you can apply or you can register to attend a session at Graphos, which is McGill's Writing Center, on revising your fellowship application for concision and clarity, which can be very helpful, okay, both to gaining you some space if you have difficulty within the space that is allowed, because you might find that you're just not being quite concise enough or clear enough. But we'll also really polish your application. And polishing is important because these are very competitive applications. You can also register for a one-on-one consultation with someone who has reviewed CIHR or FRQS studentship awards in the past through skill sets at McGill, through the Would You Fund It competition or the Would You Fund It program, okay? And here you book online a time and a date where you would want to have that one-on-one consultation. It's a specific time, and they're gonna look at your research program, and they're going to give you feedback on how it's written, not on, you know, what your research project is, but how it appears to somebody who's reading it as a reviewer, okay? And then I've included also some web resources on tips as you're working through this to think about polishing your application. So you'll get the slides, but the link is, you can go straight to you can even Google search Graphos, McGill, and workshops, and you'll be able to find the information for how to register for the revising your fellowship application session. You'll also be able to use the quick link on slides, and Christina is on it, and she's also attached the link into the group chat if you want to register for that. So Julie had a great question about what's a competitive GPA for masters. I can't unfortunately access my presenter notes as we're in the presentation right now, because there is a cutoff for the master's CGS GPA. So there's like really a cutoff that will be, your application will not be considered below the cutoff within your graduate program or within McGill. And it's important to know what that is so that you don't waste your time, okay? I would say the best information for that could be found at the McGill at the McGill GPS funding page. They know they have at least the GPA information there on how to calculate your GPA. So I would go there to calculate that right away so you can see whether or not you're eligible or not. So general writing tips, just to conclude, and again, if you attend something with Graphos, they'll really, you know, come back onto this. But for general writing tips, you want to try to use active voice instead of passive voice, okay? You want to use road signs to guide the reader. So FRQS, for example, they tell you exactly what they want in that project summary page or 2 pages. So give them exactly that, okay? Don't be wishy-washy, okay? Use verbs that are, you know, direct. Keep your sentences on a shorter side. Don't run on with sentences, and use strong verbs instead of adjectives or adverbs. And at, you know, your last read, also make sure to check your this and your its within your sentences to make sure that it's clear what those this and its refer to in the sentences, okay? Sometimes those are shortcuts, but you know, sometimes we don't know what they're referring to. So I realize we are now at exactly 4:03, which takes us an hour into this session. So I want to welcome those who, you know, have to leave. You're welcome to leave. We will send everyone a copy of today's slides. And it will also send you a link so you can view the presentation on our YouTube page. And if you still have any questions, you can obviously always contact us. And that's my email there, and you can contact me there. I'm going to maybe, Christina, do you mind stopping the recording, and then we'll deal with some more questions before we finish today?